The end of June 1941 began like all the beautiful Sundays of summer. I was absent-mindedly turning the dial of my radio when suddenly words brought me up short. The troops of the Third Reich had crossed the European border of the USSR. The real war, the war of religions, had begun. In October 1941, it took weeks to complete the journey from the frontier to the Ukrainian front. As we entered the countryside, we saw the scale of the disaster. Hundreds of armored cars strewn along the road, every crossroad a graveyard of metal. But soon, traces of combat vanished. We arrived in the heart of the Ukraine, an undamaged land of immense muddy plains and haystacks as long as zeppelins. Peaceful villages scattered their blue and white izba, their roofs thick with straw. Each cottage sat isolated among cherry trees, its mud walls adorned with primitive wooden sculptures. Big girls with high cheekbones splashed merrily in the mud in their Cossack boots. But, looking at the empty stations and destroyed bridges, we couldn't avoid thinking about the hundreds of thousands of men committed to the depths of Russia, trying what Napoleon had not dared, to maintain themselves in the midst of the steppes with the desert to their backs, and the ice gnawing at their bodies. Then came the mud. Whoever does not understand the importance of the Russian mud cannot understand what took place on the Eastern Front. It is a territorial defense more effective than even snow. Nothing prevails over it, neither man nor machine. It is extraordinarily sticky, permeated with oily residues. The water does not flow. It stagnates. From Dnipropetrovsk on, the trains no longer ran. The German thrust was slowing. Stalin, tottering at the brink of defeat, was saved by that all-powerful glue which brought about what his troops could not. The greatest military victory of all time was stopped in its final stage by the mud, the primal mud, more powerful than strategies, than gold, or the pride of men. We had dreamed of dazzling battles. Now we knew the real war, the war against weariness, the treacherous mire, and the sickening living conditions of the endless marches. The autumn passed. The air lost its humidity, and the mud hardened. Then it snowed. It froze. So began the great Russian winter. The shrub-like trees glistened, speckled with 1,000 snowflakes. The sky turned a pale gold. The villagers cut the tall rushes from the frozen lakes. A strange harvest under the cold November sun. Then they closed their doors for hibernation. In the village of Karabinovska, we spent weeks keeping the partisans under control. These Soviet partisans were nowhere, yet they were everywhere. During the day, they lurked in haystacks or attics, silently observing our every step. One night, they would dynamite a bridge. The next, a garage of 90 trucks would burn, lighting up the entire region. The Russian Izba became our world. A stifling heat welcomed us, a smell of dirt, of tomatoes, and of the animals that slept among the people during the winter. The fireplace fulfilled all functions: cooking, heating, and a bed for the entire family. Like monkeys on top of a barrel organ, the youngsters spent the winter on top of their fireplace, their only clothing a waist-length shirt. An entire corner was reserved for the icons, St. George, St. Nicholas, and the Virgin with almond-shaped eyes. The peasants made the sign of the cross 20 times a day, reading old prayer books by the glimmer of an oil lamp. Those people never quarreled. They looked off into the distance, eyes full of dreams. But the war never slept. The forest noiselessly absorbed the fugitives. Our posts were located 300 meters beyond the Izbas. The land had its defenses. The old Russian earth, trod upon by foreigners, used its eternal weapons. It defended itself. It avenged itself. We saw it in the dripping autumn, in the first puddle of red blood, in the black, slippery mud. The frost was only the beginning of a long, white nightmare. New Year's 1944 arrived. We wanted the year to be underway, to think as little as possible. But the Soviet pincer was closing. By January, we were installed at the confluence of the Olshanka and the Dnieper, and the jaws were drawing closer behind us. We were the tip of a long lance. Sooner or later, we were going to be cut off. The attack on the forest of Teclino was to take place on January 15th. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the artillery barrage crashed onto the outskirts of the forest. 4,000 shells swept down, pulverizing trenches and cutting oaks to shreds. Our soldiers rushed to the assault. The combat was stubborn, hand to hand. We found young women soldiers fighting like tigers, howling with fury. One, with a prettily freckled face, died in the snow. We covered her with a light layer so the weight of death would be light. The Stalin's organs intervened, rocket launchers that riddled the sector in an instant. In 1 hour, we had over 100 killed. Our little sleds came down the snowy hill, each carrying a wounded man. The field ambulance was full. Dozens of wretches stretched out on the snow, shivering and half-naked, their blood caked by the cold. On January 28th, the knot was tied. 11 German divisions were surrounded. Exactly 1 year after Stalingrad, a second Cold Run was beginning. We lived in our boots and clothes, submachine guns always within reach. Korsun had a landing strip, and the Junkers ran an airlift with sublime precision. But the Soviet fighters were watching. Every day, 12 or 15 of our planes were shot down, falling in flames amid the screams of the wounded being grilled alive. We held the last positions on the Dnieper. The sugar-coated Soviet propaganda blared from the radio, inviting us to surrender. But the shaggy masses were advancing. These Mongols and Tartars, with their brute endurance, lived on moldy sunflowers and stale bread. They were prehistoric monsters alongside our young soldiers. We were caught in a cauldron of mud and blood, and the trap was firmly closed. The end came not with a bang, but with the bitter glory of retreat. We fell back unendingly, from the Caucasus to Norway. The Allied victory had rendered useless that terrible effort of 4 years of combat. We passed from the ecstasy of the offensives of 1941 to the agony of the Baltic. It was almost midnight on May 7, 1945. The war was officially over, but we were between earth and sky. We flew in a solitary Heinkel, bearing our swastikas across 2,000 kilometers of occupied territory. Our only chance was the monster celebration in the Allied camp. The pilots would be in the depths of inebriation. We flew over Holland, then Belgium. I saw the lights of Brussels, the Soignes forest that had been my home. Ah, the wretchedness of being beaten and seeing one's dream die. We reached the French coast, the fuel running low. The plane misfired. We had to tilt the wings to make the last liters flow. Finally, we saw a ribbon of sand. San Sebastian. The Heinkel slid on its fuselage at 200 kilometers an hour, lunging into the waves. I survived. I remained, a witness to my soldiers' deeds. I could tell of their epic on the Donets and at Cherkassy. One day, the names of our dead would be repeated with pride. For hate dies, suffocated by its own mediocrity. But grandeur is eternal. We had fought for a united Europe, its faith and its civilization. We had reached the very height of sacrifice. Out there, on the endless steppes, lived real men. You, reader, friend or enemy. Watch them come back to life. For we live in a period when one must look hard to find real men. They were that to the very marrow of their bones. Grandeur is never in vain. Like the sun springing from the dark night, the virtues won in sorrow will shine forth sooner or later. Our dream of Europe was mangled, but the spirit of the volunteer remains unbowed.